Top 10 Evil Young Cannibals, Real. This is a list about cannibalism, and needless to say, the crimes committed by these young people are disturbing and disgusting. So reader, please beware. If cannibalism isn't your thing, and who could blame you? Then we highly recommend this list about cute animals, this one about life-saving civilian heroes, or this one about long-lost relatives reuniting. However, if you dare, please read on. The Chaijan family. The Chaijan family was a gang that was founded in 1993 and based just outside of Seoul. The gang, which consisted of 8 people, including a young woman, was led by 26-year-old Kim Ki-won. The gang had a severe hatred for rich people and decided to start exterminating them. Over the span of a year, they kidnapped people who drove nice cars or shopped in expensive stores. They would then ask for ransoms. In one case, they received $100,000, but they never released their victims. Instead, they tortured and killed them, claiming 7 lives in total. They also cannibalized some of their victims because they thought it gave them courage. After killing and eating some of their victims, they burned the bodies in an incinerator in the basement of their hideout. The Chaijan family was caught in September 1994, after a woman they kidnapped escaped. She had been gang raped, forced to shoot a businessman, and forced to hold the head of her friend as he was suffocated to death via a plastic bag over his head. When the Chaijan family was brought in front of the television cameras after they were arrested, they started talking about the wealth gap in South Korea. Gang member Kim Hyun-yang, age 22, said, "I feel pent-up anger and deep regret I could not kill all rich people." On October 31, 1994, the 6 men in the gang were sentenced to death, while the young woman received a 3-year suspended sentence. The men were executed in November 1995. 9 Jarno Elg, Terhi Travashanka, and Mika Riska. In October 1998, a human leg was found in a garbage dump in Hyvinkää, Finland. Shortly after the discovery, the body part was linked to 4 young Satanists: 24-year-old Jarno Sebastian Elg, 17-year-old Terhi Johanna Travashanka, 20-year-old Mika Christian Riska, and an unidentified 16-year-old boy. After they were arrested, the foursome admitted to killing a 23-year-old man, who wasn't identified in the press. The man was supposedly tortured for hours while the killers listened to the 1996 album The Canadian Chronicle by Norwegian black metal band Ancient. The man ultimately suffocated when they covered his face in duct tape. During the ceremony, they ate some of his body. The crime was incredibly gruesome, and a 40-year media blackout was placed on the case. The 3 eldest members of the foursome were found guilty. The 16-year-old wasn't found guilty because it was believed that the older people forced him to take part in the act. Elg was given a life sentence, Travashanka was given 8 years and 6 months, and Riska was given 2 years and 8 months. After being released from prison on June 7, 2007, Travashanka, who was now going by the name Terhi Tukio, was again arrested for murder. She had gotten into an argument with a middle-aged man, and she killed him by hitting him in the neck with a bell hook. She was given 9 years in prison. Elg, who was considered to be the ringleader in the satanic cannibalistic ceremony, was granted parole in December 2014. 8 Stanley Dean Baker. On July 11, 1970, fishermen found a torso in the Yellowstone River in Montana. At first, police had no idea who the torso belonged to. That would change 2 days later, when 2 men were arrested after trying to flee from a car accident near Big Sur, California. The men were 22-year-old Stanley Dean Baker and 20-year-old Harry Allen Stroop, both of Wyoming. The car they were driving wasn't theirs, it belonged to 22-year-old social worker James Schlosser. After talking with the police, Baker said that he and Stroop had split up for a while, and Baker, who was hitchhiking, was picked up by Schlosser. They went to Yosemite Park to go camping, but there were no available sites. Instead, they camped along the banks of the Yellowstone River. Baker said that he was high on LSD, and while Schlosser slept, he shot him. He then cut open Schlosser's chest and ate his heart raw. After cannibalizing the heart, Baker dismembered the body into 6 parts with a 30-centimeter, 12-in, blade and dumped the body in the river. After stealing Schlosser's car, Baker reconnected with Stroop, and the two drove to Big Sur, where they had the accident. Baker insisted that Stroop never had anything to do with the murder, but Stroop was found guilty of manslaughter. He was given a decade in prison but only did 2 years before being released. Baker was able to apply for parole after 12 years and was released in late 1986. Years later, the TV show A Current Affair caught up with Baker, and it turned out he was the leading salesman at a sporting goods store in Minnesota. He died from liver cancer on July 22, 1994. Stephen Craig Hurd. In the summer of 1970, California was still reeling from the unsolved ritualistic Tate LaBianca murders that happened on August 9 and 10, 1969, in Los Angeles. So when 2 brutal murders happened in Orange County on the nights of June 2 and 3, 1970, a panic arose in the area. However, as we know, the Manson family was responsible for the Tate LaBianca murders, but it turned out that the Uck murders were committed by a completely different group, a satanic cult led by 20-year-old Stephen Hurd, a barbiturate addict and drifter. Hurd's disciples were other young street people Christopher Gibney and Herman Taylor, both 17, and 16-year-old Arthur Moose Hulse. At first, the cult started off sacrificing small animals, but it soon decided that it was permissible to start killing humans. At some point in early June, Hurd decided that he wanted to go to San Francisco to personally meet with the head of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey. To get money for the trip, Hurd and Hulse went to a gas station in Santa Ana in the early morning hours of June 2. At the gas station, they found 20-year-old Jerry Carlin, who was working the graveyard shift. They got Carlin into the bathroom, where they hacked him to death with a Boy Scout hatchet. Hurd said that after the murder, Hulse licked blood off the hatchet. Leaving Carlin's hacked-up body in the restroom, Hurd and Hulse robbed the gas station and stole Carlin's jacket. The next day, as the cult was about to leave Santa Ana, their car broke down. So they hijacked a car driven by Florence Nancy Brown, 31-year-old schoolteacher and mother of 5. They drove her out to an orange grove, where Hurd stabbed her 21 times, and the group supposedly ate some of the body. Hurd would later tell a psychiatrist that he returned to the grave, ripped out Brown's heart, and ate it. He said it tasted like chicken. When Brown's body was found in a shallow grave 12 days later, strips of flesh were missing from her right leg, and her right arm was severed. Her heart and lungs were missing. Three weeks after the murder, an informant told police that he'd spent a night in prison with someone who was wearing Carlin's blood-covered jacket. The police found a homeless man wearing the jacket, and he said that Hurd gave it to him. The police brought Hurd in for questioning, and he admitted to both murders. He was diagnosed as a schizophrenic and sent to a mental institution, where he spent 5 years before being transferred to a maximum security prison. Hulse was given a life sentence, while Gibney and Taylor were sentenced as juveniles. Hurd died on May 28, 2005. Amazingly, despite the sensational nature of his crimes, the media weren't alerted to his death until 2010. 6. Maxim Glavitskik and Yuri Maznov. On a night in January 2009, Maxim Glavitskik and Yuri Maznov, both 20, were drinking with Maznov's 16-year-old girlfriend Karina Barduchayan at an apartment in St. Petersburg, Russia. At some point that night, the young men became fed up with Barduchayan, so they drowned her in the bathtub. After she was dead, they cut her body up with a meat cleaver and then cooked her with potatoes, onions, and seasoning. Once Karina was prepared, Glavitskik, who had worked as a butcher, and Maznov, who was a florist, ate the teenage girl. After eating her, they cut up her body and discarded the remains throughout the city and the countryside. Two weeks after she went missing, Barduchayan's mother found love poems about Maznov in her daughter's diary. Glavitskik and Maznov were arrested, and they admitted to killing and cannibalizing her. Barduchayan's mother found out about the crime from watching a televised news report. When asked why they ate her, the pair said that they were drunk and hungry. Glavitskik was given 19 years in prison, and Maznov was given 18 years. 5. Ivan L. In mid-August 2011, a man, identified as 21-year-old Ivan L., lured a gay 32-year-old man over to his house in Murmansk, which is in the Russian Arctic near the northern countries. Once there, Ivan, who was a chef, told the man to get naked and get in the bathtub. Once in the bathroom, Ivan stabbed the unidentified man to death. After he was dead, Ivan filled the bathtub and let the man soak to soften him up. After soaking for a bit, Ivan cut him up into pieces, put the meat in a frying pan, added tomato sauce and oil, fried it up and ate it. He also apparently made videos of him making the man's flesh into patties and sausages, which he uploaded to the internet. They were later taken down by the police. Ivan was arrested, and he confessed to the murder and to consuming the man. He had to undergo a psychiatric examination and was looking at 15 years in prison. The outcome of this case could not be found. 4. Gregory Cannibals. On May 5, 1977, police were called to the apartment that 20-year-old Gregory Cannibals shared with his 41-year-old father, Theodore. They found the apartment empty and covered in blood. When they went to the kitchen, they found parts of a body in a skillet, hands in the freezer, and human muscles in the refrigerator. Hours later, they found Gregory outside and brought him to the police station. When he was asked why he ate his father, he said he didn't want to waste good meat. When they asked him what the meat was like, he said that it was good and that it reminded him of steak. Cannibals was diagnosed as a schizophrenic and committed to a psychiatric hospital without being tried for the murder. The murder charge was eventually dismissed in 1980. In 1995, he was released for a short time and held a job as a grocery bagger. When the district attorney heard that Cannibals had been released, he threatened to charge him again with the murder, so Cannibals returned to the hospital. 3. Robert Ackerman. On August 26, 2007, in Vienna, Austria, Robert Ackerman, a 19-year-old from Cologne, Germany, got into an argument with his flatmate, 49-year-old Joseph Schweiger. They were living in a flat that was used as short-term accommodation for homeless people. During the argument, Ackerman picked up a 10-kilogram, 22-pounds, dumbbell and beat Schweiger's head, cracking his skull. After killing him, Ackerman wanted to look inside his body, so he cut Schweiger's torso open from his pelvic area to his neck. Ackerman showed the body to a cleaning lady, who contacted the police. When they arrived at the flat, they found Ackerman beside the body, and his mouth was covered in his victim's blood. Also in the apartment, the police found a plate with Schweiger's tongue and some of his brain on it. None of the organs from the torso were missing, but the police couldn't rule out cannibalism. Ackerman confessed to drinking some of the blood because he wanted to see what it tasted like. Ackerman, who became known as the Cannibal of Vienna, was diagnosed with schizophrenia and confined to a high-security mental institution. Ackerman said that he considered himself normal and that while in prison, he wanted to study medicine with the ultimate goal of becoming a surgeon. 2. Kevin Davis. On March 27, 2014, Kevin Davis, age 18, attacked his unsuspecting mother, Kimberly Hill, in their Corpus Christi, Texas, apartment. First, he tried to strangle her with a cord. When that didn't work, he used a hammer to crack open her skull. To make sure she was dead, and this is where the story gets really gross, Davis stuck his hand into her head and mashed up her brain. Then, he got a knife and mixed the brain up some more. Afterward, he supposedly tasted some of the brain, which he said had the texture of putty. If that isn't already going to be one of the worst things you picture all day, it gets worse. After murdering his mother, Davis lost his virginity to her corpse. After killing his mother and defiling her dead body, Davis left the apartment but got tired of running a short time later. He walked up to the first house that he knew someone was in and rang the doorbell. When the homeowners answered the door, he calmly told them to call 911 because he had just murdered someone. At the police station, detectives asked Davis if his mother said or did something that caused him to murder her, and he replied, "Absolutely nothing. I'm just a terrible, disgusting person." They asked him if he was mentally ill or if he was insane, and he said he wasn't. He just had fantasies about having sex with dead bodies. A psychiatrist also confirmed that Davis was not mentally ill. Davis pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in prison. 1. Michael Woodman C. On May 18, 1975, 5-year-old Jason Foreman was playing with his brother and a friend in a park near their home in South Kingston, Rhode Island. At some point, Jason decided to leave the park and was last seen walking toward his home, which was a short distance away. It was the day of his mother's 25th birthday, and he never made it home. Sadly, the family wouldn't know Jason's fate until 7 years later. On April 15, 1982, a neighbor who lived just down the road from the Foremans, 24-year-old Michael Woodman C., attempted to strangle a 14-year-old paperboy whom he had lured into his house. The young man escaped and told his father about the attack. The boy's father was understandably angry, so he confronted Woodman C. and punched him. This led to the police being called, and Woodmansee was taken in for questioning. While talking with the police, he admitted that in 1975, when he was just 16 years old, he killed Jason Foreman by stabbing him in the heart. The police searched Woodmansee's bedroom and discovered that he had kept Jason's bones as souvenirs in his room. After killing Jason, Woodmansee had dismembered his body and boiled the flesh off the bones, including the skull, and then polished them. Also found in the room was a journal that described the killing, including details about cannibalizing the body. Woodmansee said it was fiction, but the police believed that it was a description of the actual killing. In an attempt to hurry the trial along, the Foremans agreed to a plea deal wherein Woodmansee pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and he received a 40-year sentence. This would come back to haunt them in 2011, since Rhode Island has a program that allows prisoners to shave time off of their sentences for good behavior. Through this, Woodmansee was eligible for parole after serving only 28 years. This caused an uproar in Rhode Island, and Jason Foreman's father vowed to kill Woodmansee if he left jail. A compromise was made when Woodmansee voluntarily committed himself to a state psychiatric hospital. Should he want to check out himself, hospital officials can try to have him committed.